It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeneuve.
Hey,
Hi,
Janine.
Flo. They say two things in life are certain, death and taxes. Today we're going to talk about French taxation. Certainly France doesn't have a good reputation there.
That's right, and taxes are not the sexiest topic in the world, and it's particularly complicated here in France. There's no official tally, but by some counts, there are over 200 different taxes here in France. Now, this might seem like a snooze fest, but it is key to understanding France and to understanding tensions that can flare up. For instance, the Yellow Vest movement. So don't change the channel and pay attention. Now, the French often have a complicated relationship with the taxman, and if you ask them, they have a very good reason.
Il est bien évident
It's
qu'on
clear
gagne
we're
de moins
earning
en
less
moins
and less
d'argent
and
et on
paying
paie de
more
plus en plus de
taxes.
taxes.
Tout au long de ma vie professionnelle,
During
j'ai
my
payé
working
pour avoir une
life, I
retraite.
contributed
Là,
to
on
have
me
a
dit, ah bah non,
pension.
maintenant,
Now
tu n'as
they're
plus
raising
cette somme-là, t'as
taxes,
cette
so
somme
I
moins
have
ça.
less.
Donc,
I think it's
je
rather
trouve ça
cavalier.
un peu cavalier, quoi.
The stereotype is French people pay a lot of taxes, and for once, that's a stereotype that's true.
It is true according to the latest statistics of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. France tops the podium when it comes to the amount of tax that is taken in compared to the size of the economy. You can see here France towering over other OECD countries. Now, this is for all tax, so individual tax, corporation tax. We only have 5 minutes on the show, so we're going to focus on individual tax today. We'll have to focus on corporate tax in another show. Now, in France, there are 5 tax brackets. Essentially, you pay more taxes according to the more money you make. But as you can see here, fewer than half of French households actually pay income tax. In 2016, 70% of income tax was paid by 10% of taxpayers. So you can see it's a small amount of people who are actually paying this income tax. And a fun fact, since January 2019, income tax is directly deducted from your payslip every month, like it is in most other countries. But this being France, that change was a bitter pill to swallow.
But income tax only generates about a quarter of all tax revenue here in France. Individual French taxation goes well beyond income tax. What else is there?
But what really diminishes your net income isn't so much your income tax, it's actually something called a cotisation. It's essentially a contribution. Now, all employees here in France, regardless of what they earn, pay something called a cotisation sociale. It's a compulsory social contribution that's directly taken off your wage in proportion to what you make. And these cotisations go towards various things: unemployment, pension, healthcare, etc.
There are many taxes that people pay regardless of how much they make, and chief among those is the goods and services tax.
That's right, the value-added tax, the VAT, which was actually first introduced by the French in the 1950s. It's called TVA here in France. It's fixed at about 20% for the majority of goods and services, and VAT actually accounts for half of France's tax revenue. Now, other key taxes include the housing tax, the taxe d'habitation, which is paid by most owners and renters, though the government is actually in the process of scaling back on this tax, and there are talks that it could be completely scrapped in the future.
Now, talking about scrap taxes, there's one tax the government has been asked to symbolically bring back by certain people. This is a very hot-button issue here in France, very divisive. It's known as the ISF.
That's right. Let's take a look at the ISF. This is definitely something you should know about. Essentially, it's a wealth tax. Now, when he came to power, President Emmanuel Macron scrapped this tax, saying it only brought in 5 billion euros a year, which is a drop in the ocean compared to the hundreds of billions of euros that social taxes rake in here in France. Now, Macron said it was important to get rid of this tax to essentially keep rich people in France and to boost economic investment in France, because the truth is there are some people in France who make a lot of money and are essentially, they look for ways to not pay taxes in France, and sometimes that means being a resident abroad. Some of these people say it's not fair for them to have to foot the bill and to have to pay such a big proportion of their money. But other rich people say that's exactly what rich people should be doing in France.
I pay my taxes in France. 60% of what I earn goes to the state. Rich people must share. There needs to be a civic movement of the ultra-rich class. Tax optimization should go in the opposite direction. We should give the most we can.
One particularity about France is that there are a lot of loopholes, a lot of tax exemptions, and that can lead to this perception of inequality.
That's right. This leads to our word du jour, which is a niche fiscale. Now, literally, this is a tax cubbyhole. And by some accounts, there are over 450 of these niches fiscales in France. For instance, we journalists get a tax break. And some people, well, it's debatable whether or not we deserve that tax break. Just to show, though, that this is a very opaque tax system that we have here in France. It's hard to see who pays what, and everyone feels like they're kind of getting the short end of the stick.
The important thing to remember here is the whole point of these taxes, these high taxes, is the idea is for the money to be redistributed into good quality public services, fast trains, good hospital services.
And when you ask French people, a lot of them say we have very good public service. And so a lot of them get it. They get that they have to contribute. They're ready to chip in for the greater good. But some people say that the public service that we have here in France is kind of going downhill. Essentially, they're not really sure what they're paying for anymore. The tax burden has become somewhat of a source of resentment in recent years. Many people are just fed up, ras-le-bol in France, though others are a little bit more philosophical about it.
Taxes ensure that we have good roads and that our schools and hospitals work. It's a civic duty, and I'm happy to pay.
Public services are paid for by taxes.
Yes, but the government is taking them away from us. We have to drive long distances to go to the post office or to a tax collection centre. They're telling us that our taxes will help improve public services, but for whom?
I complain because I'm French. But if you want to have solidarity in society, it's the only way. Money doesn't just fall from the sky.
It's a tricky situation because people want to pay fewer taxes, but they want better public service. So it's a conundrum. Perhaps the first step to calming people's nerves would be to make the system more transparent and less complicated.
Florence Villeminot, thank you so much for that clear look at the very complicated issue of French taxation. Don't forget, if you have questions for Flo about anything about France or the French, you can tweet her at Flo Villeminot.